Well, today we are in the weekend, and apparently in the weekend we are going to look over some hotfixes that Blizzard pushed through. There have been some fixes, but more importantly some PvP balance changes. As you know, I am a PvP expert, so in here you are going to be able to gain tons of insight on these changes. The first one though is not PvP related, it's useless related, because it's a change to Fleshcraft, the Necrolord ability, particularly related to Shaman. Spiritwalker's Grace now allows you to use Fleshcraft while moving. This is good if Fleshcraft was actually worth using most of the time. The logic behind the change is that Spiritwalker's Grace allows you to cast all Shaman spells, and when you learn Fleshcraft, it's in your Shaman spellbook, so it only made sense to allow your Fleshcraft to cast while moving. Now the question is, we are in the 23rd of January, which is exactly 2 months since release, so it seems like a pretty late change to make, you know, something that should have probably been thought a little bit earlier. It wouldn't have changed the standings of Fleshcraft compared to the other Covenant abilities, which is bad. It's Door of Shadows levels of bad. In fact, probably worse, because at least Door of Shadows allows you some cheese, you know, some skipping, some getting to places you usually can't, whereas Fleshcraft is just bad. The other change, and this is where we enter the PvP level, the other change is that in PvP, players now deal 20% less damage to Death Knight, Hunter, and Warlock pets. Now, when you look at the representation of specs and classes in PvP, Death Knight, Hunter, and Warlock are pretty much the least used classes right now in arenas. The only class that's doing worse is, of course, Demon Hunter, because of the current state of Havoc, which has less to do with PvP and more to do with their actual strength. When you're doing pretty badly in PvE, you're also likely bound to not be doing too well in PvP. Havoc last expansion wasn't doing badly at all in PvP, and it was also very powerful in PvE, and now they are much worse, but in this case, if you don't count Havoc, the next 3 bottom classes are all the pet classes. Now, is this related to having pets? I don't think so, but of these 3 specs, particularly Hunter, when you play Beast Mastery and even Survival, is actually pretty hurtful to lose your pet. So my extensive PvP experience says this is going to be a nice quality of life change, but it's not going to move these classes to be any more popular than they are right now. Now, talking about much bigger changes than this pet change, we have gone back to the days of old with dampening, because now in 2v2s, dampening will begin at 20% whenever you have a healer or a tank. Particularly important to mention tanks, because it's not just that tanks, you know, are too tanky, it's just that they heal too much. When I say they, I'm pretty much talking about Prot Paladin. You know, Prot Paladin was and has been even used as an alternative to Holy Paladin, because they can basically heal as much as a Holy Paladin, except they are much more tanky, they are much more defensive. So this is a particularly good change for PvP when it comes to the balance of healing currently going on in arenas. Another change, this is going to be a little bit more divisive, is that Convoke the Spirits has been nerfed. Convoke the Spirits no longer casts Full Moon and Feral Frenzy when engaged in combat with enemy players. Now, Feral Frenzy is not the main problem here. The Feral Druid Convoke is actually way more powerful because of Ferocious Bite Spam, not really because of Feral Frenzy. It is all about Full Moon. So now, people have been coping with Convoke 2 ways in arenas. There is player number 1, who simply says, dude, just interrupt, forehead. Dude, just line of sight. You know, Convoke is a channeled ability. If you let a balanced druid channel Convoke, then it's your fault. So it's balanced. No pun intended. And then there is the other group that says, fuck no. Sometimes, even if you let it channel for a single second because your GCD is on and you can't do anything else, they can cast 2 Star Surges in a row and just deal 40k damage to you. You know, 1 Star Surge, 1 Full Moon, and you're dead. It's not about interrupting or stunning or CCing or going line of sight. It's just, there's just not enough time. And more often than not, it feels like a slot machine, a casino where whether you roll Full Moon or not, or whether you crit or not. So this change is going to make it way more stable. They can still gimp you in a couple of GCDs because you get a couple of Star Surges in a row, but now it's no longer going to be about Full Moon. Now, I was hoping for the actual change of Convoke, which is going to be something that we will talk about when it comes about PvE. Whether or not any changes will go through for Convoke in the balance tuning before the next patch. My logical idea for Convoke was always that you need to have Full Moon talented if you want to cast it. Just like you need to have Feral Frenzy talented if you want to cast it, otherwise it's not going to be in the pool of abilities you can cast. This would also remove the frustrating RNG element. I am clicking Convoke, am I or am I not going to get a full moon? Because that's going to be like 30-40% more damage to my Convoke if I actually get a nice roll and I get out a full moon. So this talent will also fix the heavier amount of RNG that is tied to this ability. But for PvP, it is a good change as far as removing RNG goes. It's likely that the two sides will still remain of their own opinion, that they didn't have a problem with Convoke or that Convoke was OP. So one of them will be particularly happy with this change. Another change is that Triune Ward has been nerfed, because now the effectiveness of the triple shield has been nerfed from 65% to 50%. Now, if you don't PvP, you have probably read this legendary for the first time. You're like, what the shit is this? Well, Fire Mage in PvP is in a situation that they are so powerful with their toolkit that they don't even need a damage legendary. That is their current situation. This is not the first time, and it won't be the last time, that mages act like this in Arena. The general playstyle of a mage in Arena is to just blink everywhere, line of sight everywhere, and keep spamming polymorph until the rest of your team or your other partner has lined up a set of CC together with your polymorphs or your Ring of Frost, where you can use your combustion and your CDs and try to one-shot someone. This has been so effective in several years, expansions and expansions ago, that you don't even need a legendary to make this stronger. What you need is a legendary that allows you to stay alive for longer, that allows you to play this playstyle for longer. And Triune Ward is a very good for that, because it's going to give you much more defensiveness due to your shields, your mage shields. This is an attempt at limiting the annoying slipperiness and tankiness of a mage in Arena. But we have to mention, though, that when I say Fire Mage doesn't need a legendary in PvP, I might be lying. I might be lying because what they do have is Infernal Cascade. Now this is the damage of Infernal Cascade that is going to be given to a Fire Mage. This type of damage, as you can see by the damage graph, is basically stronger than a legendary. Take in mind that your average run-of-the-mill spec without powerful conduits gets 2 to 3% from conduits. Even a conduit that goes to 4% more damage is considered very powerful. As you can see here, all the other conduits for mage are much weaker and in line with this type of power. But Infernal Cascade is past 12% of your damage, which is essentially more than a legendary level of power. So that's probably also why they don't need a damage legendary to be able to do their combustion damage in Arena. And now this effectiveness has been nerfed by 33%. So the extra damage that they gain inside of combustion with Infernal Cascade has been nerfed. So let's say you have the 213 item level version of this conduit. With 2 Fire Blasts, you're going to be gaining 27% more damage inside combustion. That is going to be nerfed by 9%. So you're going to be doing 9% less damage inside their combustion. That's the nerf that's going to happen in PvP. It is by far the more nerfed spec when it comes to PvP. The nerf to their defensiveness because of the legendary, and the nerf to their damage because of their main, most powerful conduit. Another nerf goes to Holy Paladins. You have seen, if you started watching the AWC tournament, that Holy Paladins in Arena have a problem. It's not even as much as their healing, it's not even as much as their defensiveness, it's about their mana conservation. Their ability to conserve mana, because they don't actually just cast abilities because of their mana, but also because of their holy power, which is something that other specs don't have. So this nerf is going to affect healing, because Divine Favor, the PvP talent, that is going to allow you to quickly cast out a heal, has been nerfed by half, from 60% more cast speed to 30%, which is an okay nerf. The problem is, I don't think this is the main issue with Holy Paladins in Arena. I think it is the mana you need to target when you're looking at a Holy Paladin. Talking about healing and talking about Paladins, there's another nerf, which is the Word of Glory nerf. Word of Glory's healing has been reduced by 20% in PvP situations. Now, I want to remember something to you. So, if you haven't kept track with Retribution Paladins, for example, they have had quite a bitchy community. There was this idea that even when Red Paladin was actually pretty popular compared to other specs in Arena, it was treated as if it was a leper, a pariah that was barely even played, that could do nothing, Paladins claiming for more mobility, even though you had one of the highest bursts in the game, one of the best defensives in the game as a DPS, and they thought they would still want to be even more mobile, and then the blame game went on Word of Glory. In the beta, Word of Glory was nerfed. For quite a few years, actually, for quite a few expansions, Word of Glory stayed at 330% spell power coefficient, and then at the start of the beta, it went down to 225%. So there were the complaints that now the healing is terrible, it doesn't heal as much. So Blizzard over time, throughout the beta, brought that 225% up to 290 until eventually, right before the release, just a few days before the release, buffed it back to 315%. So almost the same as what it was in BFA and stayed for like 5 years, since like Mists. Now the result is that World of Glory has been insane. People have been reporting 20, even 30k crits on World of Glory from non-Holy Paladin specs, so Prot and Ret. Now of course you can excuse this for protection because protection is a tank and because World of Glory is one of their active mitigation abilities. But for Ret, the excuses were a little bit more lacking. So now the effective healing of this ability has been cut down by 20%. I still think it's a little bit too high, but we'll have to see how much this changes things. Now lastly, we have a hotfix. Now don't get too excited, because Arms Warriors have gotten their Conduit Mortal Combo fixed, because it used to essentially be bugged and make your second hit of Mortal Strike do 20% less damage. Now, while this is good that it has been fixed, it's good that now it is working as intended. This Conduit, unlike Infernal Cascade for Fire Mage, is doing 1.7% of your damage, and Mortal Strike in and of itself is barely doing 10% of your damage. So with this Conduit fixed, you're lucky if you're going to be doing 0.2% more damage than before. Basically, you have to treat this as if Blizzard gave you a free socket on your weapon. That's basically the change in terms of your damage, and that's it. And these were all the changes for the hotfix round in the last couple of days. Now, one thing to talk about that has interested me quite a bit, we will talk about the Mythic Plus and the specs, compositions and whatnot, probably tomorrow or Monday. But what we have to talk about today is that the MDI, the Mythic Plus Invitational, is on its way. It started the first cup, there's going to be multiples of them until eventually all the qualifiers are done and you get to do the grand final in a couple of months. What I want to mention though is that we are going to play a game now. These, what you see here, are all the compositions used by the teams in the first cup. Now, Where's Waldo here has been turned into Where is Shaman? That's right, because we just went several weeks talking about how strong Shaman was and how powerful it was as a healer, Restoration Shaman, and yet every single composition used by these teams, reminder, these teams can use multiple picks, can change multiple classes and specs if they want to. Not a single one of them so far has used Restoration Shaman. It has been almost exclusively Discipline Priest and Holy Paladin. And this is pretty much the only spec that has been surprising, because when it comes to tanks, it's pretty much been just Vengeance Demon Hunter across the entire board. So it kept up with the premise that Vengeance are the dominant tanks. When it comes to DPSers, same thing. We mentioned that Mages, Balanced Druids, and Marksmanship Hunters were the more popular range DPS, and those are the only ones that have been used. And when it comes to melee, there is another thing that we will talk a little bit more in depth in a couple of days or tomorrow. There is just one rogue so far. It's been Unholy Death Knight and Windwalker Monk without any other rogues except a couple of rogues used in the same key, one against each other, both outlaw. So it's interesting to see what is going on and how exactly the representation is going to continue progressing. One thing to mention when you look at MDI, when you look at these top tier teams competing in trying to clear the dungeons as fast as possible, is that this one is the first competition you see in Shadowlands, and it is amongst the hardest when it comes to difficulty. When you look at the previous expansions, the difference between the predetermined key level of the MDI and the actual level that groups were able to clear is much wider, deeper into the expansion. To give you some examples, previous BFA MDIs had keys locked at plus 18 when groups were able to clear plus 27. They had keys locked at plus 21 when groups were able to clear plus 30. What is interesting is that this MDI has done things a little bit differently. In this MDI, the mythic level is plus 18 and the current highest key is a plus 23, and it's just from two groups. So from plus 18 to plus 22, there is a pretty narrow margin. What is also more important though is that the item level is set at 229. This is another hilarious change from the previous seasons of BFA. The previous seasons of BFA were locked at mythic gear equivalent, sometimes even a little bit less. This expansion is even higher than before, the item level, and on top of that, this expansion is much harder to gain item level. So the key level for the first season is much closer to the highest key levels that groups are completing right now, but in return, the item level set for you to clear those dungeons is also quite higher than normal. I think it's pretty hilarious that probably Blizzard forgot that this expansion doesn't grant the same amount of loot as the previous expansions or the previous seasons. So they thought, oh yeah, this is going to be like BFA. By now, players should probably be around 229 item level, which is quite not what's been going on, unfortunately. And with this, we can bring the video to a close with the question of the day. The question of the day is going to be, which of these specs that you don't really play, not really used to playing, and yet you're always somewhat sad that you don't see them being more popular? Maybe it's in PvP, maybe it's in Mythic Plus, maybe it's in raids. You kind of want to see them to be more played, you know, to be more in the spotlight, and yet they somehow never make it. Maybe because you enjoy their aesthetics, maybe because you enjoy even the sound of their abilities, or maybe their transmog, or maybe because it's just a cool spec that you don't play but you think it's nice. For me, that spec is Demonology. You know, all the DPS classes rotate and take turns to become the flavor of the month for the season and for the raid tier. You know, you have sometimes it's marksmanship, sometimes it's beast mastery, sometimes it's survival, back when survival was an actual spec. Sometimes it's affliction, and sometimes it's destruction. Sometimes it's fire or frost or arcane. The only spec that seems to be left out of this nice little game is Demonology. So I've kind of developed a soft spot for them. You know, the poor guys have only been very meta. The last time was in like Blackrock Foundry. You know, we are approaching 6 years since then. It's always a little bit sad when there is a new batch of changes and balance tuning, a new tier is coming up or a new expansion is coming up, so the tier recrafting starts. You think maybe it's their time, you know, maybe it's gonna be the time that they become meta again, and then every time it's like, nope, not their turn. So for me, that's my pick, Demolox. So let me guys know what's your pick for your weak spot spec that you wish were a little bit more popular or powerful. See you guys soon, and in the meantime, I have to go and babysit my nephews.